Thank you, guys. I'm Michael Dowling, Chair of the Council of Licensed Firearm Owners. You probably know Nicole McKee well, our spokesperson and secretary. We'll keep it brief. I've listened to a number of people today and the messaging seems to be reasonably consistent, so we'll allow some time for question. Registration. The issue we see with registration is we haven't seen any evidence to date that it will work and be cost effective in relation to reducing crime or improving public safety. That's it. Regulations. So if we look at the legislation as drafted, there's a whole section of it missing. How is it going to work in regulation? And without that detail, it's hard to understand the impact. And even for the committee, the comment has been made, how does a committee understand the impacts for licensed firearm owners without the detail of what it's going to cost? And then you drop down to the licensed firearm owners, and a number of the clubs have been asked, what do you estimate it'll be costing you in a new regime? There is no detail around it. So how can we understand when the detail isn't there? I guess the biggest issue for us is that in the changes that have been made and the changes that are being proposed, we can't see what would have prevented a foreign terrorist killing New Zealand people. If you wanted something to be a different approach, and I was looking at it from the aspect of last week and this week, if we had something different to contribute, it would be, can we sit down and work out what needs to be changed and look at the evidence on how we can improve firearms legislation and work together on it. One of my personal experiences I had through Colfo, I had the pleasure of representing New Zealand with MFAT on the United Nations. And so that was dealing with the Programme of Action and the Arms Trade Treaty. Now, we were one of 2 countries that had pro-firearm groups in support of the Arms Trade Treaty. So not a great group. But I remember being quite proud of the fact that New Zealand was quite progressive. When we looked at the Arms Trade Treaty, there was only one aspect we didn't have already covered, and we've since addressed that. I had the opportunity to speak with firearm user groups from different countries, but one of the ones that had a large impression on me was speaking to one of the agents for alcohol, tobacco and firearms in the US, and he said, we envy the relationship you have with your agencies in New Zealand between the user groups and the agencies. And I was proud of that. We were heading well above our weight. I wouldn't be as proud now talking about how we've reacted to the events. We've taken an exclusive approach rather than an inclusive approach. And our inclusive approach is the most important aspect in determining who should have access to firearms. Happy to answer any questions.
Right, David.
Yes, I just wondered if you could expand a bit on something on your submission that really grabbed my attention, which was about the decline in, I guess, face-to-face training and initiation and vetting from 2015 onwards. I don't think that story's been told very well anywhere except possibly in your submission, and I think it's important that more people hear that actually, far from tightening up, there was actually quite a silly loosening of the rules in the run-up to 2019.
There's been quite a number of changes that started to occur in the licensing process since 2015. And it started off initially with getting rid of all the volunteer firearm safety instructors from around New Zealand. So in 2015, there were 487 volunteers from the communities that would teach in their communities. And the most important aspect of this was that any new firearms license applicant got to have a face-to-face meeting with an instructor who would quite often pick up little details about that person, be able to go to their arms officer who they had good relationships with and say, hey, this guy passed his test, but there's something about him, not quite happy with it. I was the Wellington coordinator and I did that several times with people that came through. Just don't like this guy, something about him, or he answered this way, or he did this. And it gave a bit of an alarm bell, I guess, to the arms officer who may have asked for extra things to be required. So that was the first face-to-face aspect of firearms licensing that started to be eroded from 2015. By 2018, all the firearms safety volunteer instructors had been dismissed and no longer exist in the voluntary role. We had 147 locations around the country. It's now down to about 50. And they just assess now rather than actually give any training. So all the training involved is online training as well. So we're now having a licensing regime where we're going online, where we're having phone calls for assessments, we're losing the face-to-face, and at the beginning of 2018, the vetters and the arms officers for New Zealand Police were also told that they were going to be restructured out of their jobs.
So just to be clear, from 2015 to 2018, the government of New Zealand systematically disassembled human face-to-face checks on people getting and getting licenses and using firearms that might have detected somebody who was a bit odd and probably shouldn't have been running around with AR-15s.
They have been disestablishing it since 2015, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Greg.
I've had some dealings with Colfo over years in the previous role I had. And it would be fair to say Colfo have always resisted any change to the system, including after when it became clear that there was issues with identifying individuals who were getting mail ordered firearms. The police officer, you were supposed to get a police form that came in with a police officer's name on it. And it was also supposed to have the name of the registration. That was never able to be checked. And there was sort of resistance that was okay, that system. Well, it wasn't okay, and basically I think it took a reporter through the television to get it changed. And that was sort of resisted as well. My fear is that also that there was a resistance to any changes around the MSSAs, the semi-automatics that became a problem. You guys are the experts and you know a lot about this. What I fear is that by saying we don't need to change anything, then you are taking yourself out of the race. And I know that I gave advice to Colfo, I said, don't go to the select committee in 2017 and say nothing needs to change, because if you do, you will become irrelevant. And you know that the changes that were recommended in that committee, and you opposed those changes at the time as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, certainly the vast majority of those changes. Isn't there a danger that if you constantly resist any recommendation for change, then each time there is a disaster like we had in Christchurch, then you reduce your ability to actually ensure what you want to achieve is that everybody, the good people with firearms, get to keep them and do what they want with them.
So
I know that's a bit of a statement, but rather a question, but I do sort of challenge a little bit that nothing needs to change.
So I accept that challenge. You say we resist change. We were involved in the change around especially dangerous air guns to assist police in defining those as a result of a death. So we have been involved. On the 14th of March, it's on record in the FCAF meetings that we said the Arms Act needs changes. And we would like to spend 12 to 18 months working through what changes police would like to make and what the community would like to make. And then the 15th of March events overcame us. But we've been back since then, and I've spoken to Acting Super McElwraith and said the same thing, and I've reiterated it again today. We would like to be involved in change, but we'd like to look at evidence-based change.
Well, the changes that were recommended post the select committee that looked at the Arms Act in 2017, what was your view of those changes?
May I? In 2017, there was a select committee inquiry into the illegal possession of firearms by criminals. The reason why a lot of those recommendations were rejected was because they did not touch on the purpose of that inquiry, which is about the illegal possession by criminals. And there were a number of recommendations that were supported. There's never a full resistance by Colfo. As Michael suggested, it's always been about working together, but working on evidence-based facts to be able to come out with legislation that's really, really good. And Colfo have not resisted everything. I'm really proud to be a part of an organisation that's worked well with government and police to make some pretty good changes, including as recently as November 2018, where we worked on the security arrangements. We gave some advice around the pistol grip arrangements. So we've actually done quite a lot of really good work, but where we do get a bit vocal is where we see stuff that's been recommended that's not about what we're actually discussing. And this is what this arms legislation bill is doing as well. It's actually putting in recommendations that don't or won't stop Christchurch from happening again. And we have to be vocal about that for our members.
Well,
so Greg, I do have other people.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay, Brett, go ahead.
I think you probably sort of answered the question, but I just want to crystallise it in a shorter question. So is it your view that the status quo is fine as it is and doesn't need to change? Or is it your view that the changes that are proposed in this legislation simply won't deliver the objectives that are set out?
It's the latter.
Thank you.
But we do believe that the Arms Act 1983 does need revision, it does need upgrading, but this bill doesn't cut the mustard.
So, no, I'd like to have a... Yeah. There's a couple of things. Just first of all, I see you said you validated the email addresses for all these people. Yes. Have you done any more vetting on them, or?
So we had a contractor that worked through and made sure that with their staff that all the details around the names were complete and the email addresses were all tested.
Right, so looking through, I see names of people I know, so, which is fine. But do you know if they're all New Zealanders? Was that part of the testing, or?
It was New Zealand email addresses.
Great, thank you. That was part of what I wanted to know, so that's fine. But you didn't sort of vet them for who you approve of or don't approve of or anything like that? It's just there's some, at least a couple of people there from my own electorate. I go, okay, you know. No, all right, that's fair enough.
And that's something that has been brought into question. I mean, we have since July had over 12,000 people contact us and become subscribed supporters.
Right.
So
yeah, okay. More important, I mean, that's fine, it's great you've done that, but more importantly, one of the things that was discussed this morning was around domestic violence. And I was interested in what you had to say, Nicole, about being a voluntary training officer, and to what extent in that situation that you were picking up on issues of domestic violence, and whether that was the sort of thing that you were taking into account when you were having your conversations, or I suppose I'm looking just for a general comment from you on that issue with guns.
When you're meeting people for the first time, they usually don't come out and say, oh, you know, I bash my wife. Yeah, so you don't really get that, but you do get some concerning comments made, you know, generally, like one of the first things we ask people is, why do you want a firearms license? And one guy said, so I can go, you know, that you sort of go, okay, we'll watch what else you have to say. And then other people might come in and say that they want a firearms license, you know, for self-defense. Well, we don't do that here in New Zealand. That's not acceptable by firearms license owners. That rings alarm bells for us. So we will go and speak to the arms officer and say, hey, you know, they said they want it for self-defense, or questioned self-defense. And that's where we used to have these relationships with our local police. We don't have them anymore.
Right.
One of the aspects we had in 2009, I remember that was my first year on the board in Colfo, and the police brought forward a change in the fit and proper assessment, and that was that they had a psychologist write up some questions so that they could psychologically assess applicants. And that was something they bounced off us, and we looked at and supported that change. So there are aspects that have been improved all the way through. One thing I would commend the committee do is have a look at the fit and proper assessment, look at what's involved and look at the questions, the separation of the spouse. When the process is done properly, it's very thorough, very robust.
The spouse is usually taken aside separate from the husband and can be interviewed for up to an hour, and they even are asked whether or not they
Not
think their
always.
partner should have a firearms license.
Proper,
Not always.
Now,
and that's how the process was developed.
we're at time, but we're running slightly
Certainly.
ahead of schedule, so I'm happy to take the last two questions from Greg and then from David, but if you could just keep them to the point would be really
Thank you.
good. Thank you.
Yeah, could you envisage a situation when we do this evidence base that you would agree with registration?
If the evidence supported it. And my biggest concern, I was having a chat to one of the people high up in customs, and they said, if you spent $20 million on an intelligence centre, you would get a better cost return as far as controlling organised crime. If we spent the money on scanning every container that came into the country, we would pick up drugs, firearms, a whole range of goods. And we just think there's a better use of the money.
So you're not saying no? I'm sorry.
I'm not saying no, but with any budget, you always got to look at it and say, what could we get for what we spend? And we just see, based on what's happened overseas and even what's coming out of Australia recently, that they're questioning the cost and the benefit.
Okay, I need to move on to David's question. And leave it
You've had a lengthy cross-examination in front of this committee on your past submissions and positions rather than your current submission. We've had other submitters say that you are in cahoots with potentially the largest arms dealer in Australasia. I just wonder, is that latter claim true? And how do you feel about people trying to characterize the submitteur rather than analyze the submission?
So we did some analysis on that and thought, okay, where do we sit? And looking at the subscribers, we have 9 retailers that support us. And I did a printout and I shared that with some of the others. Gun City, who we're accused to be in alliance with, is not a financial supporter. We have no alliance with them. We chose a guardian, being David Tipple, and then the attempt there was to create 3 guardians who were appealing to different disciplines within the firearms community to rally them together to a common cause. And that was our intent, rather than to have individuals or groups head off in different directions that weren't appropriate.
We have not received any funding from overseas organisations. We are based on volunteers for the firearms community, more so our members.
So we have 4,000 individual members that have contributed on average about $150.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the your input into this process.
Thank you.
Thanks for the
Really
time.
appreciate it. Thank you.